Hello, hello, ladies and gentlemen. So today we have a bit of a special episode because today is our 300th episode of the Training for Tracking podcast, which is a little bit hard to believe in all honesty. And I knew it'd been creeping up for a while, but yeah, I just realized 300 episodes in. And it's really, really, really a massive milestone for me because, I've been running this podcast for just over 3 years from 3 years now. And, during that time, I've been releasing episodes almost every single week, over the last 3 years. And when I first started this podcast, it was pretty early on in the days of Summit Strength. I had been training people for hiking for a while, but the whole brand, the whole business of Summit Strength was pretty new. And I started the podcast knowing absolutely nothing about podcasting. In all honesty, I still don't really know a lot of the technical stuff that a lot of people do. But I started it really as an opportunity just to talk through my ideas. Because at that stage, I've been doing a lot of article writing. I've been sending out emails to my newsletter. I've been doing posts on Facebook and Instagram, and that was all well and good. But just having the opportunity to hop on a podcast like this for 10 to 60 minutes and literally just talk through my ideas in depth, it really sounded really appealing to me. So I thought, you know what, whatever, I'll give it a go. And at that stage in my life, I think I'd personally listened to maybe 4 or 5 podcast episodes. I'd never really been a consumer. I didn't really know how people went about it. So I was like, you know what, I'm just going to get on and just going to chat and see how it goes. And yeah, just over 3 years later, we're up to our 300th episode. We've had more than 500,000 downloads of this podcast as of the time we've been recording it. And it's just been amazing, amazing, amazing to see how much it's grown over that time and all the amazing guests we've had on and all the hikers we've helped over this time. So, being this 300th milestone, I thought today I would do a little bit of a special episode. And what I'm going to be doing is sharing 30 of my favorite tips when it comes to training for hiking. And 30 tips, which has sort of been the culmination of the last, 4 or 5 years of me training for hikers and obviously 3 years of running this podcast. And, I was thinking of maybe doing 300 tips, but then I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be here forever. So I thought I'd cut it down for 30. And I think 30 for our 300th episode sounds pretty good. So I'm mostly going to be talking through all of these tips. Some of them, may be good reminders for you. Some of them you may have heard before. Some may be new. But I really do think all of these tips make such a massive difference in any training for hiking journey. So I thought it'd be fun to talk them through today. So tip number 1 is less is more. And what I mean by this is hikers have a tendency just to do so much training when they're looking preparing for a hike. And they have a tendency to say, look, I got to get ready for a hike. I'm just going to go hike 3 or 4 times a week, or I'm going to walk every single day with a loaded pack or whatever it may be. And so many hikers I talk to just have these ideas and these perceptions around just doing so much training. And in all honesty, I truly do believe less is more when it comes to training for hiking. And I much prefer if you can hone in your training, be very, very targeted towards your particular need, be very smart with your training structure through all the things we talk about this before, you can get way, 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 way more done in your training with so much more time and effort. So if you're the type of person who trains 7 days a week for multiple hours a day or tries to hike 4 days a week in preparation, just let me know and let me tell you less is more. And I've seen that time and time and time again. Now, tip number 2 is one of my favorite ones is using water bottles when you're loading up your pack or your training. So when we're training for hiking, typical sessions might involve going out and doing hikes with a loaded pack, or doing loaded pack walking around the local neighborhood, or doing hill or stair sessions with a loaded pack. And these are awesome sessions. And one thing I really like to do is opposed to loading up your pack with, say, weights or dog food or rice or whatever it may be, to making the majority of that weight up in water bottles. And what this does is it just gives you an option to pour some water out if things start to get a little bit too much. If you start to get tired, sore, fatigued, anything like that does sometimes creep up, it gives you that option to actually pour a bit of water out, have a bit more control. And I think that's an awesome, awesome, awesome tip for anyone doing any type of loaded pack training. Now, tip number 3 is when it comes to success when training for hiking, consistency is is the most important factor. And when you're looking at how much you should be training per week, the question you should be asking yourself is not how much do I think I can squeeze into a week? It's how much do I think I can be consistent with week after week after week after week. And being consistent with your sessions and ticking off 3 sessions a week every single week for 12 weeks is going to be way more effective than doing 7 sessions in one week and 1 session in another, or 6 sessions in one week and then 2 sessions in another. And it may sound like you may be able to squeeze more in like that, but having a consistent routine where you intentionally do it every single week, most important thing. Tip number 4 is when you're training, don't forget to strengthen your lower legs. So, as you probably know, I'm a massive fan of strength training for hiking. I think it's absolutely amazing for a million reasons. And a lot of hikers who are going about this training, they put a huge amount of attention into the big muscles in their legs, the quads, the glutes, the hamstrings. And absolutely, we definitely want to develop these areas. But sometimes the lower legs, so the muscles below the knee, get a little bit neglected. The calves, the shins, the feet. And these areas do a lot of work while training. So while hiking, I should say, so spending a little bit of time training and developing them and being consistent with that as well, definitely a high priority for a lot of hikers. Tip number 5 is in your training, practice your weaknesses. Meaning if there's certain types of training or certain types of hiking which you struggle with, if you struggle with river crossings, if you struggle with downhills, if you struggle with hiking on uneven terrain or whatever it may be, you'll want to be practicing that in your training. A lot of people go down that route trying to avoid things they don't particularly feel strong on or confident on. And then they get caught out when they're actually on the trail and they come across this stuff when they don't expect it. And that turns into a whole ordeal. So if you are aware you have particular weaknesses, particular things you aren't so good, try to practice it in your training. Do some small hikes that may expose you to that. Do some walking on uneven terrain, in local area or whatever it may be. And practice your weaknesses. Definitely important thing. Tip number 5 is fantastic training tool for hikers, not just for loaded pack walking or hiking, but for your strength sessions as well. And I would say probably 75% of the hikers that I work with are all doing their strength training from home. And probably 50% of those don't actually have access to any weights. They don't own dumbbells, they don't own kettlebells or whatever it may be. But essentially what we do is we use a loaded pack for our strength training, for our squats, for our step downs, for our glute bridges, for our rows, for our presses. And it's such a fantastic training tool. It's not as convenient as dumbbells sometimes, but it is definitely a great option. So if you're training from home and you don't really have access to weights, that's a great idea. Now, tip number 7 is find a support group for yourself. Now, this is something that I've sort of ran into many times in the last few years. And a lot of hikers we speak to, some hikers are lucky enough. They have their friends, their family who love hiking. They like getting out with them and whatever it may be. But a lot of hikers out there, hiking's kind of a solo sport in the sense that, their family aren't interested in it. Their friends aren't interested in it. And they may do some hiking groups and this and that, but sometimes they really, they don't really connect with the people. And that can make things tough if you don't have people around you to give you that support you need, to encourage you when things are going bad, to celebrate your successes, celebrate your wins, or whatever it may be. So doing your best to try and find a support group, it can go a long way. Now, for us, the hikers that we work with directly, we have sort of a private Facebook community for people who we work with through one of our programs. And essentially in there, we have a lot of people in this situation. But we've got this community of hikers all around the world who share their wins, share their successes, share their adventures. And it really, really does help a lot of people who do find it a bit more of a solo thing. Now, if you're not working directly with us, it's just doing something where you can find a bit of a support group. Maybe find a local meetup group who goes out for hiking. Maybe find a local hiking club. Maybe find another online group who may be able to help each other out. Or do your best to find a support group because it can go such a long way. Now, tip number 8 is a little bit of self-care proactively can go such a long way. Now, one thing that I get all of my hikers to do, and I fully encourage them, is every single week I ask them to spend 10 to maybe 20 minutes at the most doing a little bit of self-care. Meaning doing some stretching, doing some foam rolling, doing some self-massage, whatever it may be. Just 10 to 20 minutes each week. Now, I find if you can do that proactively and do it each week, Even if you don't really feel like you need it, but you get in that habit of doing it week, 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 week. It is so, so, so effective at just helping the body feel good. But a lot of people sort of tend to just use it when they kind of feel like they need it. So when they're sore, when they're tired, whatever it may be, they sort of, go, all right, maybe I'll do some more stretching, maybe I'll do some rolling. And yeah, that can be nice, but it's so much more effective if you use it proactively. So a tiny little bit of self-care dedicated every single week, it can go such a long way. And when I'm saying this, you don't have to spend hours and hours and hours in doing it, but 10 to 20 minutes every single week, doing a bit of foam rolling, do a bit of stretching, do that each week, and go a long way. Now, tip number 9 is always overpack your snacks when you're going on training hikes, when you're going on longer cardio sessions. So many people undereat on their hikes, and you can get through things fine, not an issue. Like, people get through hikes and training not doing anything. But essentially, one really easy way to improve your performance, improve your comfort, and improve your capabilities on the trail is making sure you're eating them and just making sure you have an array of snacks that you can kind of sort of pick at as you go through. So I always say overpack on your snacks because the worst thing that's going to happen is, you'll bring them home and you might have an extra 200 grams, 300 grams in your pack. Not a big deal. But if you underpack, you do run the risk of sort of not having enough food where your performance, your capabilities are going to be impacted a little bit. So always overpack your snacks. Tip number 10 is when it comes to strength training, single leg is typically better than double leg for hikers. Now, what I mean by that is a lot of hikers, when they're doing their training and their strength training, a lot of people in the gym, they're really, really familiar with double-legged exercises, squats, wall sits, deadlifts. All of these are fantastic exercises, and I use all of these with my hikers. But it is always, always, always a good idea to emphasize and include single-legged exercises as well. So things like step downs, single leg deadlifts, single leg glute bridges, and working one leg at a time. And making sure you are working on that. Because for hiking, we spend a lot of time on one leg. And for a lot of hikers I see, they're really, really strong 2 legs at a time because they've been training that for ages and ages and ages. But the second we put them on one leg, they struggle. So when you're training, always make sure there is a component of single leg training. It goes such a long way. Now, tip number 11 is my most successful hikers when it comes to preparation are the ones that remain flexible. Now, not so much flexibility around their muscles, around their joints, but flexible in their mindset. Because when it comes down to a training journey, things will always, always, always come up. People will get sick. People will go away. There'll be family issues. There'll be weather concerns. There'll be aches and pains that creep up or whatever it may be. And the people that I've seen have the most success in their training time and time and time and time again are the ones that remain flexible around these things. So if they have a busy week of work, they adapt their sessions. They may go from 40-minute sessions to 10-minute sessions, fit that in. If they're not feeling 100%, if they're a bit sick, they'll go from, relatively difficult sessions to really easy sessions until they feel better. If they're dealing with family concerns, they'll maybe just force themselves to wake up 30 minutes earlier in the day so they can get in a little session before, life can take over or whatever it may be. Those have been consistently the most successful hikers I've ever seen. Keeping flexible. Alternatively, people who are really, really rigid with their training, it can work if you do get that perfect run, but it's very rare we sort of have week after week after week, month after month, where things don't come up. And having flexibility around what comes up, I've seen it again and again and again, just how important it is. Now, tip number 12 is exercise minivans are probably the best $10 you'll ever spend on training equipment. Now, what I mean by exercise minibands, they're those little sort of elastic rubber bands, which are kind of like little loops. And I get all my hikers to buy these, and you can buy them online for like $10. You don't need to get anything fancy, but they're so versatile. They're so useful for a number of exercises, and definitely a worthwhile investment for anyone out there. And if you want to find some, just go on Amazon, type in mini bands, and just buy a cheap brand. They're kind of all the same. But best $10 in on training equipment you're ever going to spend. Tip number 13 is people will always have an agenda. And I mean this specifically when we're talking about negative comments. Negative comments you may receive from coworkers about your hiking. Negative comments you may receive from family about your training. Negative comments you may receive from people online who are supposedly friends or whatever it may be. Anytime someone says something negative to you, or at least 99% of the time, They have a personal agenda. It's not about you, it's about them. They're trying to pull you down to make them feel better about themselves. They're trying to sort of steer you away from hiking to make them feel better about not doing things like this. When we get negativity in our lives, 99% of the time, people have an agenda. And it's really, 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 really easy to get thrown off by these things, to get really down, really negative on ourselves when people aren't so nice to us. But taking a second to recognize that someone probably has an agenda and it's about them, such an important thing. And that may seem a little bit out there in regards to, these tips, but I've seen with my hikers so many times there are negative people in their lives, and it does get in the way of their sort of confidence, their motivation. And it is an important point to remember. Now, tip number 14 is find a way to track your progress. One of the most beneficial things you can do when it comes to consistent training over time is just having a system to track and to look back on how you've been doing your sessions. Now, I don't mean like having to sort of track every single repetition you do, every single weight, every single hike, or whatever it may be, but more of a case of saying, okay, on this day, I've done a session, or I've completed what I was going to say I was doing, or whatever it may be. So for all our clients, we have a training app that I use for my hikers, and it's as simple as being able to tick it off on the app and say I've completed this. Super simple. So 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 months further down the line, you can look back and say, hey, I did all of this, or maybe I didn't. Now, other things that people have used, like for me personally, I have a little calendar that I keep next to my work desk, and I tick off each day that I train, or each day I do a certain habit. But I've had clients who use like a sticker chart, who put stickers on their calendar or whatever it is. But just having a way to track your training and just sort of to be able to look back and keep consistent, because it may sound silly, but it really, really adds a lot. Now, tip number 15, and I love, love, love this idea, and it's something that goes into my life so much, is the quote that I don't know where it came from, but it's really powerful. People typically overestimate what they can achieve in a month. But people typically underestimate what they can achieve in a year. Meaning, a lot of us, when we're looking at short-term goals, we're like, in the next few weeks, we can accomplish boom, 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 X, Y, and Z, do all of these things, get fit, strong, resilient, fit all this stuff into our life. And more than likely, people typically overestimate this. And we're like, we get to the end of the month, we may have done certain things, but we haven't really done as much as we want. But typically, people really, really underestimate what they can actually change in a year. What they can change in 12 months of consistent application of things, even if you're not going full steam ahead, but the changes you can make over 12 months, it's just incredible. So really you bring this point back is like, if you are struggling short term, you're like, I'm not really getting where I want to be, or this and that. Sometimes zooming out on the perspective and just sort of saying, okay, where was I compared to 12 months ago? Or where do I want to be in 11 months? Sometimes that can be such a powerful thing. Now, tip number 16, most health professionals don't understand hiking. And what I mean by that is so many times I've heard from hikers and so many people that I've sort of communicated with, they're health professionals, the people they work with, whether it's physios, physical therapists, osteopaths, chiropractors, podiatrists, or whatever it may be. They tend to consider hiking is just walking for a long time. And this isn't a point of saying like these health professionals are not worth seeing or they don't know what they're doing. But when it comes to the specifics of hiking, the majority of people out there can't just consider it walking for a long time. And we know as hikers, there's a lot more that goes into hiking than just walking. There's ups and downs, there's long ascents, long descents, there's carrying a pack, there's uneven terrain, there's weather concerns, all of these different bits and pieces that make hiking unique. And the issue with people not really, considering hiking as a challenge, not really knowing what it's about, is when we get advice, sometimes the advice can just leave us a little bit short. Meaning people can be cleared for exercise or cleared to hike, and their health professional and say, yeah, fine to go do this, or whatever it may be. But they may not be particularly ready. So what I mean by this is, work with your health professional, work with your physio, work with a physical therapist, whatever it may be. But if it really kind of seems like they don't really understand hiking and what you're trying to do, it may be worth trying to shop around for someone else that you can see. So see another physio, see another physical therapist who may have a bit of an understanding. Or at the very worst, work with another health professional who does understand with hiking and who can collaborate with your, primary healthcare physician. Definitely something worth considering. Number 17 is everyone has their own story. And what I mean by this is every single hiker you come across has their own story, their own reason for hiking, their own reasons for doing what they do. And sometimes when we give, I guess, unsolicited advice, sometimes when we sort of see people on the trail and we're like, they shouldn't be out here. Or sometimes, when we just have these sort of, instinctive reactions to people, just know everyone has their story. And sometimes we say things, we do things, we react to things, we sort of, or whatever it may be. And it's just an instinctive thing. And like we might be like, what are they doing here? Or it's so dangerous, or they shouldn't be doing that, or they shouldn't be a hiker, or whatever it is. Or maybe they're asking a silly question, whatever it is. But everyone has their own story. And it's a really, really, really important thing. Keep this in the back of your mind. And the reason why I bring this up in these tips today is I hear so many stories from hikers who do explain their stories to us, and they explain the negative things they've ran into in the hiking community or in the community in general, and they explain the reasons why they're doing their hiking, or why they're struggling, or why this. And obviously, they're not going to be explaining to you if you just see them on the street or on the trail. But everyone has their own stories, so keep that in your mind. Tip number 18 is find the hikers that suit you. If you're going out with if you're going out with friends on the trail, if you're going out with hiking groups or whatever it may be, do your best to find friends or groups who are going to link up with the type of hiking you want to be doing. Because there's so many different ways people go about hiking. Some people like to just go out and just get through the day as quickly as possible. Some people like to spend all day just dawdling along the trail, having a good time. Some people like to hike just to take photos and see plants and this and that. And it can turn into a really negative experience if you're out on the trail with someone who's just a different type of hiker for you. And if you have done that, please try your best not to get discouraged that that's just what hiking is, or you have to deal with that, or you have to be a solo hiker if you don't want to. Keep on trying, keep on exploring for other people who may line up with you. Because again, I've heard from so many hikers over the years who's gone to see being with one hiking group, and they've gone out, they've had a terrible time, and they've never been to another hiking group again. It's like, it just doesn't work for me. Keep on trying. You will be able to find a kindred spirit. I promise. Tip number 19 is you need to be wary when we're talking about training for hiking about of completely avoiding areas of training forever. So quite often people will sort of see a physical therapist, a physio or something like this, and they will say, look, I don't want you doing something. I want you to avoid this because it'll aggravate your issue. And that's all well and good in the short term. But completely avoiding things in your training, for most hikers, over the long term, it's not something we want to do. So, for example, like a couple of clear examples here is, I've sort of had a chat with a hiker the other day, and their physio had sort of said, okay, they had a hip issue, and they were like, hey, I don't want you doing any stairs. I want you to stick to walking on the flat. Now, in the physio's mind, they probably meant, I don't want you doing this while your hip's sore. But in the hiker's mind, they were like, I'm not allowed to do stairs anymore, forever. And then they went on the trail. They came across a section which actually did have some stairs, and they got a massive flare up of discomfort. They're like, oh my gosh, what do I do? And that was the issue, that they'd completely avoided stairs in their training, which wasn't a good idea. The same thing with another story that I've talked with someone who had been told they need to completely avoid any hip exercises because their hip was uncomfortable. Another person with hip pain, their hip was uncomfortable. They were told, don't do any hip exercises, let it settle and whatever it may be. And then they got the clear to go out hiking. They went out on the trail, and lo and behold, their hips started to get sore. Not because hiking's bad for it, but just because their hips weren't strong enough, and they've been avoiding anything on the hips for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. So if you are told to completely avoid something, please ask them, how long for? Because more than likely, you don't want to be avoiding specific areas forever. Now, tip number 20 is slow is typically better when it comes to your strength training. Meaning, when you're doing repetitions of strength training, when you're going up and down in a squat, when you're going up and down in a lunge, when you're going up and down on anything, typically it's much more effective for a hiker to do slower repetitions. So instead of rushing through things like we often see in like HIIT classes or boot camps where you try and do things as quickly as possible, get really huffed and puffed, To get the best results out of strength training, slower is better. Great rule of thumb for this is on the lowering portion of every single repetition you do in the gym, try to aim for about 4 seconds on the lowering portion. So when you do a squat on the lowering portion, do 4 seconds on the way down and then go up, then 4 seconds on the way down and go up. On a lunge, do the same thing. On a single leg deadlift, do the same thing. Really, 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 really great way of just getting more out of your strength training. Tip number 21 is if you don't have hills and don't have mountains to train on, you need to get creative with your training. A lot of conversations I have with hikers are like, hey, I don't have any hills. I don't know what to do. And they kind of just sort of sit there. They don't really do anything. They just do walk around the local neighborhood. They just do the normal training. Then they get on the hike. They absolutely struggle on hills. If you don't have hills, fair enough. You don't have hills to train on, but you need to find some way of getting creative to get ready for this. Loads and loads of different options you can do to get ready for elevation if you don't have hills, but you need to be creative with it. So, for example, you might find a set of stairs in a car park, in an office tower, in a sports stadium. You might do some step ups and just buy a step and do extended periods of step ups of 5, 10, 15 minutes at a time. You might do some sled training if there's a sled in the gym, or you can make your own sled outdoors, or even load up a lawnmower and load that up with a little bit of weight and go back and forth. You might get a gym membership and do some stair climbing in there, or whatever it is. If you don't have hills, just don't sort of accept that fact. You need to get creative. Tip number 22 is if you're training in a gym, the leg press is a great machine for hikers. And I have gone more and more of a fan of the leg press for hikers, purely for the fact that it's just such a simple way to put some serious load through the legs in a really, really safe way, which you don't really need to learn. So typical ways I'll use a leg press for hikers is doing a double-legged leg press, where you're just doing 2 legs at a time. Doing a single-legged leg press where you're doing 1 leg at a time, and I love that exercise. Doing a calf raise with 2 legs on the leg press, so you're pushing up with your toes. And doing a single-leg calf raise. And I like to vary between doing quite high repetitions of like 20 to 25 repetitions of these exercises, where you get a really good burn, and also challenging the weight and getting down to 8 repetitions, 7, even 6 at a time. Leg press is a fantastic exercise, and if you're using a gym, fantastic machine. And if you're using a gym to train for hiking, definitely a good option. Tip number 23 is don't forget the fun. Sometimes when we're training for a big hike, we get wrapped up in the whole idea of training. Everything is a training hike. Everything is a training session and this and that. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes people can start forgetting about the fun fact of why they actually like to get out on the trail. And they just think of it as a training hike as opposed to a hike. So if you do find yourself caught up in that, every once in a while, just go out on a hike for pleasure. You don't have to treat everything as a training hike. Go out one that's easy, that's just beautiful views, that you don't carry a pack. And just don't forget the fun factor, because it's very easy to do. Tip number 24 is hiking poles are worth their weight in gold. And if you're not using them, get around them. So good for helping support the feet, the knees. So good for helping support posture and reduce, back discomfort or neck discomfort on the trail. Great for balance, great for movement efficiency. If you're not using them, they are worth their weight in gold. Absolutely love them. Tip number 25 is incidentals really do add up. And what I mean by this is just little random things that you do in your day outside of your normal training session. They really can add up. So typical examples of this, it might be like, quite often we'll recommend to hikers, hey, when you're waiting for the kettle to boil, I'd like you to do some calf raises. Or when you're waiting for the printer, I'd like you to do a single leg balance and just stand on one leg. Or when you're in between meetings, I'd like you to go do a wall sit or a few squats or whatever. But just like little incidental things in the day. They may sound silly, they may sound just a little bit really not worth your time, but over time really do add up. I love it. Tip number 26 is I love exercise sliders. And this is a piece of equipment that in the last sort of 12 months I've really gotten into using again. So if you haven't seen them before, they're these little discs that you can buy. And you can buy them online for like $10. And they're basically these little discs that you put on the floor, and they sort of slide across the floor, forward and back. And you can basically use them to just change the impact of certain exercises. So, for example, you might be doing a lunge. We may say a reverse lunge. And typically a reverse lunge, you're standing together, you step back, you lunge, and you come up. but go back to standing. And that's reverse lunge. If you're doing that with a slider, what you do is you have your back leg on this slider. And instead of just stepping back, you would slide your leg back, go down, come up, and then slide your leg back in. And it's just a really, really great way of just changing the focus of an exercise, just adding some extra challenge. And it's a really, really cool thing to use at home or in a gym. And you can use lots of cool exercises with this. You can do lateral lunges where you slide out to the side and in. You can do hamstring curls with those where you're up in a glute bridge position and push your legs in and out. And there's lots of really cool ideas you can do it. And it'll cost you like $10 online, but another great addition. Tip number 27 is try your best to find a positive in every single day. Now, this is such a great, great thing to do, and it's something I do at the end of every single work day, where I'll sit down, I do a little end-of-day routine where I write out a bunch of things that I've done for the day. But one of the things I sort of say is, what was a highlight, or what am I proud of today? And just that feeling of being able to cap off what I've been proud of, a terrible day, it just changes things around. And we do this in all our meetings with our clients. Like we find a positive, we find a win, what's been going on, and finding a positive every day and making a routine of that, such a great thing. Tip number 28 is practice different hiking paces. Now, one thing I've seen again and again and again and again and again for hikers that run into is essentially they'll do all their training by themselves. They'll go out and hike by themselves. They'll do a load of pack walking by themselves, and they get to a really good position where when they walk at their own comfortable pace, they're very, very happy. But they get into trouble when they go out with a friend or with a hiking group who walk a quicker pace than them, and they're just not ready, and they end up having a terrible time. They get exhausted, they get knackered, they get tired, and they just don't have good fun because they're just walking at a quicker pace than they're used to. So I sort of say to most hikers is practice walking at quicker speeds every once in a while. You don't have to do it all the time and absolutely push your walking speeds. But maybe once a week or once every few weeks, do some walking where you're walking at an intentionally quicker speed. And just that little bit can go a long way into helping prepare you for a quick hike. Tip number 29 is isometrics are a great challenge. So what isometrics are, they're basically when your muscles contract without moving. So a typical example of an isometric exercise is like a wall sit, where you're on a wall, you go down a squat position, you just hold that position. And you feel those quads burning and burning and burning and burning. And those quads are contracting, but they're not actually moving. And this is a really, really, really great challenge to kind of add into your training in different ways, shapes, or form. So the wall sit's a classic example. Another great example is like a split squat isometric, where you're in a split squat position, which is like a lunge position. You go down to the bottom, and instead of coming up, you just hold that bottom position for anywhere from 10 to 60 seconds. If you do that now, you'll notice, whoa, that's a challenge. Same thing with a calf raise. Instead of doing if you're doing a calf raise, just hold the top position for like 45 seconds and see how that feels. Or you can really apply this to any type of exercise. With push-ups, you can hold the bottom position. With glute bridges, you can hold the top position or whatever it is. But isometrics are a really, really great way of just mixing up your training and giving yourself a little bit extra challenge. And then tip number 30, and this is a classic hiking quote, but it's a good way to wrap things up, is hike your own hike. We all hike for our own reasons. We all have particular types of hiking we enjoy. Some people love challenge hikes where they can really, really push themselves. They're grueling, they're physically exerting. Some people love overnight hikes. Some people like, just doing things that are really, 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 really simple and they don't like getting tired. Some people like trying to aim for fastest known times and really, really push it. Whatever it is, find what you enjoy and do it. For me, I train hikers to do all of these different things. And some people think I'm a bit of a crazy hiker, a hardcore hiker. But in all honesty, the hikes I like to do aren't massively challenging. I like to do hikes that don't require very, very minimal planning. And I like to do hikes where I can go out and just enjoy myself. I've found over time that's why I hike, and I enjoy doing that. And as much as sometimes I may feel pressured, maybe I should be doing tougher things because I train people for tougher things and this and that, but I know that's what I enjoy. So find what you enjoy and keep that top of your mind. And if you want to try other things, fair enough, but don't feel obliged to do harder things than you want or more challenges or easier or whatever it is. Find your own hike and hike your own hike and take in the best that you can. So that is my 30 tips of training for hiking to wrap up this episode, the 300th episode of the Training for Trekking podcast. So hopefully some of those tips, they may resonate, may give you some good ideas, some good reminders, but I really do think all of those are so valuable for so many hikers. Now, before I do wrap this up, I just want to say, a big thank you for all the listeners. All the listeners who have racked up 500,000 listens over the last few years of this podcast. All the listeners who've been sort of listening to all of these, from getting involved with the Summer Strength community, and just making this a real pleasure to continue to do, and just making this a realistic possibility where I can hop on and just chat away for however long. So for anyone listening, a big thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time to tune in. I really do hope the information helps you with your hiking, with your adventures, and I'm really looking forward to plenty more episodes to come. So with that being said, thank you so much for listening today. A big celebration for the 300th episode. Really appreciate you tuning in, and we'll talk to you very soon. Bye.